كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. أما بعد، سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا. ربنا زدنا علما. We start off firstly by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, and sending salutations upon His beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we make dua to Allah ta'ala that He grants us the ability to seek knowledge for the right purposes, right reasons, and He makes this knowledge beneficial for us. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So today we will be continuing with the topic we started last time, catching the congregational prayer, the Jama'ah prayer. So certain rulings that we have left off on the bottom of page 103, we will continue with, insha'Allah. Meaning if a person is to enter the masjid, then if the Jama'ah has already started, are you allowed to pray the Sunnah prayers or not? We will be discussing rulings of that. And are you allowed to make up for any Sunnah prayers that have been missed, the Sunnah prayers that were beforehand, before the Fard prayer? So we'll be talking about that. And some other rulings, one or two other rulings we'll be discussing as well, insha'Allah, regarding this, finalizing this particular topic of the Jama'ah prayer. When a person joins the Jama'ah, then when will the raka'at count? Meaning, how do you join the prayer in order to make sure that the raka'at counts? Things like this. And are you allowed to leave the masjid, the mosque, once the adhan has already been called, or once the salat, the Jama'ah has already started? We'll talk about that. Then we will go into just the starting of the sajdatul sahw, the prostration of forgetfulness. We will go into some of the concepts there, and inshallah we will start those off. Yeah, and I think that's about how much we will get through today. If one enters the mosque and finds the Imam already performing the obligatory prayer in congregation, he should not pray any sunnah. So you come into the masjid and the Imam is already performing the obligatory, the Fard prayer in congregation, then you cannot pray any sunnah. The only exception to this is except for the 2 rak'ats before Fajr. So that's the only exception, because the 2 rak'ats before Fajr are so emphasized that you can still pray the 2 rak'ats of Fajr, Sunnah, the 2 Sunnahs we say before Fajr, even whilst the congregation is going on. But the condition is, as long as he feels reasonably sure that he will not miss the congregation upon quickly finishing the Sunnah. So you can quickly perform the 2 Sunnah and you will not miss the congregation. As long as this is the case, then you can perform the 2 Sunnahs of Fajr whilst the congregation is happening. However, having said this, it is always best that that you perform the 2 Sunnahs of Fajr at home before you leave, or in a side room somewhere in the masjid, if the masjid has some side room, or somewhere else, not in the main congregational area. If there is nowhere but the main congregational area, then you pray at the back, somewhere aside, where don't go and join where the rows of the congregation is, because to pray the sunnahs there with where the congregation is, this will be makruh tahrimi, this will actually be prohibitively disliked. So you shouldn't do this. But still, praying the two sunnahs is still emphasized. That's the point. Now, if a person feels that they will not be able to catch the fard, the obligatory prayer of the fard, the fajr, the imam has started, and they came in and they haven't prayed the two sunnahs yet, but they will not be able to catch the fard, then they must join the fard. They will not perform the sunnahs now, because obviously catching the congregation is more superior. Performing the fajr fard is obviously more superior than performing the sunnahs there. So that's what will happen there. Then he moves on saying the sunnah prayer before dhuhr is made up within its prayer time before its 2 rakat sunnah. So if a person missed the 4 rakat of dhuhr, because that's the other sunnah prayer which is very much emphasized, the 4 rakat sunnah, you missed that before dhuhr, so you can make it up after the dhuhr fard prayer within the fard, dhuhr time, only within the dhuhr time, and before the 2 sunnahs. It says here before the 2 sunnahs after the dhuhr. However, there is another opinion also, which is also a strong opinion in the Hanafi madhab. I'm pretty sure it would be mentioned in your footnotes that you can pray after the 2 sunnahs as well. So in one opinion is you pray after the 2 sunnahs because you want to maintain the order, because after the 4 rakat of fard there comes the 2 sunnah of dhuhr, the sunnah mu'akkad, the emphasized sunnah. So you keep that order, you don't ruin that order, and then you pray the 4 sunnahs that you were meant to have prayed before, you pray them afterwards because you've already messed that order up anyway. Others say no, because the 4 sunnahs come before the 2 sunnahs, you pray the 4 sunnahs first and then you pray the 2 sunnahs. So it's a different way of looking at it. So you can do whichever way, it's fine. Then the merit of praying in congregation is attained by catching even the final tashahhud with the congregation. So we started off with this ruling of the merit, the reward a person gets for praying in congregation. So this congregational prayer is attained according to the Shari'i concept, is attained even if the person gains the last sitting with the imam. So the reward will be gained. Yet, by doing so, one is not considered praying in congregation. Meaning, from another angle you can look at it, from another perspective, if we take the perspective of a person that says they came in the last sitting, then they've more or less missed it, because you came right at the end, you missed it. That's what we would say generally. That's with anything, right? If there was a invitation of food and you came right at the end, you'd say you missed the party. But you did come at the end, didn't you? But you would say that to the person that you missed the party. So in exactly the same manner here, because the person has come right at the end, from another angle, they would be, in our dialect, you can say, in our custom, it would be considered as though the person missed that congregation. That's why when it comes to a person taking an oath, let's say the person took an oath, they took an oath that he will not pray congregational prayer, or they took a vow that they will not pray a congregational prayer, and then they came at this time, right at the end, in that last sitting position, and they joined the prayer then, they would not have broke the oath. The oath would not be broken. Reason being is because oaths, vows, they are governed by what customarily people would consider to be, the thing. So over here, customarily people would not consider this to be you joined you were part of the congregation, you missed it. So that's why it says here, yet by doing so one is not considered praying in congregation. So like in vows, like in oaths, like I explained. But the ruling before that, just not to confuse, is talking about just the merit, the ruling, the hukm of the person. That hukman, the person is joined, but in terms of this this exceptional ruling in terms of vows and things, which is governed separately using other rules. That's why he would not be considered praying in congregation. So hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, that's not such a major mas'ala. Moving on, one may pray voluntary prayers before any obligatory prayer as long as he feels reasonably sure that he will not miss performing the obligatory prayer in its time. So this is obviously same for man or female, male or female, as long as he feels or she feels that they won't miss the fard prayer. So if you're praying alone, for example, and you have enough time, you want to pray the voluntary prayers before the obligatory prayer, no problem, you can pray voluntary prayers before the obligatory prayer, as long as you know that the obligatory prayer, you won't miss it, and you won't, the time won't lapse. So that's that. If one prays the obligatory prayer by himself, after which its congregation begins, so you're praying the obligatory prayer yourself, the congregation begins, it is, so you've already prayed. So this is regarding, you've already prayed now, yes? You've already prayed the prayer, you finished the prayer. Now a congregation starts. It is not disliked to leave the mosque. You can leave the mosque, it's no problem, because you've already prayed your prayer. Except for Dhuhr and Isha. So this is only when the prayer has actually started. So when the prayer has already started, if it's a Dhuhr prayer or if it's Isha prayer, now it's disliked for you to leave the mosque. You should join. So in which case he should pray with the congregation, intending 4 rakat of voluntary prayer. So now that the Dhuhr or Isha has started in congregation, even though you've prayed it, you would join that prayer. It would be makruh for you to leave otherwise. If you don't join the prayer and you leave the mosque, it would be makruh because the prayer has already started. In any other prayer, in Fajr and in Asr and in Maghrib, if you've already prayed your prayer, even if the congregation starts, you can leave the mosque, it will not be makruh for you. Because obviously, because in Fajr and in Asr, you can't pray. If you join that prayer, you will be joining voluntarily. You're praying the 2 rakats or the 4 rakats voluntary, and you can't pray after Fajr and after Asr, you can't pray voluntary prayers. So that's why that won't be allowed. And in Maghrib, because they're going to be praying 3 rakats, and there is no such thing as a 3 rakat voluntary prayer, so you do not join in. So these are the reasons why you won't join the congregation as a voluntary prayer if after you've prayed your prayer. Then he says it is disliked for one to leave a mosque in which the adhan has been performed before praying with its congregation, except for a valid excuse. So if an obligatory prayer is not repeated after its performance, meaning if you've already prayed your fard prayer once, so you've already prayed your dhuhr prayer once, you can't repeat your dhuhr prayer. Maybe if a person has a doubt, then they want to repeat prayers. This is not something that a person should be doing. It's not allowed. It's actually disliked. Makruh tahrimi, again, it's prohibitively disliked to repeat a prayer just on, a person's feeling that, oh, maybe I want to repeat my prayer, or maybe I want extra reward, perhaps even. So these are reasons a person should not repeat prayers. But if a person knows after finding out from somebody that I did this in my prayer, what happens, and a person says, the scholar, then the person says that you need to repeat your prayer, then you would repeat your prayer, because the first time your prayer didn't count, or the first time your prayer was prohibitively disliked. It was maybe performed but with dislike. So if that did happen, then you would repeat your prayer. But otherwise, on a normal general basis, you would not repeat prayers. Sometimes people get a bit of OCD and start repeating prayers over and over. Remember, this is from the shaitan. A person should not repeat prayers like this, because shaitan is trying to make prayers difficult, so eventually a person leaves it. Anyway, that's his goal. Moving on, if one joins the congregation whilst the imam is in the bowing position, says the tahrima, meaning whilst you join the congregation, you say the tahrima, then remain standing until the imam raises his head. So you've joined the congregation, but you remain standing. And meanwhile, whilst you're standing, the imam now gets up from the prostration, from the bowing position, gets up from the ruku', they get up. They say Sami Allahu liman hamida, the Imam says Sami Allahu liman hamida, and he gets up. Then he did not catch that rak'at of the prayer, meaning you joining that prayer, you didn't catch it. Simple rule here is, in order to catch the rak'at with the Imam, you have to have caught the Imam in ruku', in the bowing position. So when you came to the prayer, you have to do tahrima, you do Allahu Akbar, tahrima, you stand for a moment, even if it's a momentarily, you stand for that little moment, and then you go and say Allahu Akbar and you go into ruku'. If you catch the Imam in ruku', the Imam is still in ruku' and you caught the Imam in ruku', that rak'at counts. That's what happens. Now technically, what is a ruku'? A ruku' is when you stretch your hands out and they reach the knees. So when you are standing, your hands are not going to reach the knees. But when you bow down enough that your hands have now reached the knees, then this is a ruku'. This is the beginning of the ruku'. Obviously, you go down further and you become, almost straight, like a right angle, more or less. If you look from side on, so you become almost, you try to straighten your back and straighten the head. That's the full ruku'. That's the complete ruku'. But the ruku' would have been attained just by a person bowing enough that their hands have reached the knees. So if you've bowed enough that your hands have reached the knees, and you got to that position before the Imam said Sami Allahu liman hamida, or before the Imam got up from there, started getting up from there, ruku'. So the Imam, he's also still got his hands on his knees. So technically he is still in ruku'. Then you have caught that rak'at. But obviously to be that precise is going to be difficult because you can't look at the Imam unless you're in the first row or thereabouts. So you're going to have to try to estimate that the Imam is still in ruku'. It looks like I'm going to catch him. You catch him. You caught him. That's fine. Okay. But if the Imam starts to get up and they've now come out of ruku' and then you went into ruku'. So he came out of ruku' and, millisecond later you went into ruku'. You didn't catch the rak'at because you have to have, synchronized with the Imam in that ruku'. Even if it's momentarily, you synchronize with him momentarily. He was in ruku' and you were in ruku'. That catches that rak'ah. So that's that mas'ala over here. Then moving on, the last one over here of this topic, it says if a follower bows before the Imam. So this is now talking about if a person goes ahead of the Imam. So it's using the example of bowing, the same example we can be used of prostrating or any other integral of prayer. So if the follower bows before the Imam, before his Imam, yet after the Imam had recited the minimum obligatory amount by which a rak'at is valid, that's number one. So after the Imam had recited the minimum amount of qira'ah, meaning at least one verse. So if the Imam has recited at least one verse, and thereafter the follower goes into ruku' before the Imam, and also the Imam then catches him, meaning the follower, in it, meaning in the bowing. So the Imam catches up. So the follower, after Imam had recited the fard amount of qira'ah, the follower went into ruku' already. For whatever reason, they went into ruku' before the Imam. Then the Imam finished that qira'ah and caught up to that follower. So they synchronized. Okay? Then the follower's bowing is valid. Otherwise, it's not. Meaning, if these two things didn't happen, meaning first thing, which is that Imam had not yet recited the minimum amount of qira'ah, the minimum amount of recitation, the obligatory amount of recitation. Before that, the follower already went into ruku', already went into bowing position. So therefore, their salat is invalid, regardless of anything else. Even if the Imam catches him later, is invalid. So that's the first thing. Second thing is if the Imam had recited the minimum amount of qira'ah and then the follower went into the bowing position before the Imam, but the follower got up from the bowing position before the Imam came into the bowing position. So there was no synchronization in ruku' between the Imam and the follower. So then what happens? The ruku that obviously doesn't count. That ruku that the follower did, that doesn't count. What he's going to have to do is then go into ruku again. Yeah, with the imam or just after the imam, he's going to have to go into that ruku again. If he doesn't do it, then again his prayer will become invalid because he didn't do a ruku with the imam. So that's what this is talking about. There's 2 points there. Hopefully everybody's understood them too. Now, moving on to the next topic, here we have the prostration of forgetfulness, meaning the sujood as-sahw. So if a person makes a mistake, then what to do? Okay, mistake in the wajibat, in the mandatory factors of the prayer. So now let's look at the book. It says it is mandatory wajib to perform 2 prostrations along with an extra tashahhud and 2 salams for the omission of 1 or more mandatory wajib requisites of the prayer due to unattentiveness or forgetfulness, meaning the person did it mistakenly. So if you remember the wajibat that we prayed of the prayer, the point is that if a person either misses or messes up a wajib, a mandatory wajib of the prayer, then because of doing so, they then have to then make up for that by performing this type of sujood. So how that happens is in the last sitting, when a person is in the last sitting, they will pray tashahhud. They will pray the normal tashahhud. After praying the tashahhud, they will do salam. 1 salam to the right hand side they will do. After doing that salam, they will do this 2 prostrations of forgetfulness. They will do sajda and another sajda. So in essence, they're backtracking. They do salam and they just basically backtrack back to that last 2 sajdas, and they just carry on from there, in essence, if you can understand it like that. So they do 2 prostrations, 2 sajdas, and then they sit again, and then they start again the tashahhud, and then they read the durood and the dua after it. So in essence, you're just re-performing them 2 sajdas and going and carrying on, finishing the prayer, and then you finish the prayer as normal. So this is what we call the prostration of forgetfulness, and this is done when a person misses a wajib, whether it's more than 1 wajib as well. There's only one performance of this, the 2 sajdas, for however many mistakes there may be. So this is what a person would do. So if a person missed a sunnah act of prayer or messed up one of the sunnahs of prayer, then you cannot perform this prostration of forgetfulness. There's no need for it. Likewise, if a person missed a integral, a fard of prayer, then again you cannot make up for that using the sajdatul sahwa. You cannot make up this by prostration of forgetfulness. You're going to have to repeat that prayer. Or if you were still in prayer, then you make up for it like we've talked about previously. And if a person missed this wajib, mandatory wajib of the prayer, and they did it purposefully, they did it intentionally, then again you cannot make up for that. This is only allowed when a person does it forgetfully and inattentively. They did it by mistake. So this is the case for this. It is sunnah to perform the prostration of forgetfulness after the first salam. So like I said, the way to do the prostration of forgetfulness, you do 1 salam and then you do the prostration of forgetfulness. Thus, if one does so before the salam, it is mildly disliked, is makruh tanzihi. So after the first salam, it's obviously the better thing to do. Moving on, one becomes absolved of performing the forgetfulness prostration if a time in which prayers are disliked enters. It gives an example of it which is quite easy. So such as the changing of the sun after Asr. So if there is obviously after in Asr prayer, towards the end of Asr prayer, when the sun starts to become pale, the Asr prayer becomes makruh now. So if a person was performing Asr right at the end of the Asr, at the end of this time, and this time they've now got to the end of their salah, they do a salam. Once they do the salam, this makruh time enters, this disliked time enters. Then they do not need to, they're excused from performing the prostration of forgetfulness. Now, even if they had to do it, it's excused. They don't have to do it anymore. Likewise, a more obvious one, if the time expires, such that the prayer is broken. So the time expires whereby the prayer would be broken if you continued it. Then, such as sunrise for Fajr. So for instance, a person was praying in the last 2 minutes of Fajr time, they've only got 2 minutes left, and it's going to be sunrise. So they were just getting their prayer in, and they made a mistake. Whilst rushing, they made a mistake. They had to do sajda sahw because of it. Now, if they do sajda sahw, then the prayer is going to break because they're going to go into sunrise time. So now they are excused from performing this sajda sahw. They don't have to do it. They just do salam, and that's it. Okay, meaning their prayer would be done whilst this, mandatory wajib act was omitted. That their prayer would be counted just like that with the integrals. Basically, they've only done the fara'id. That's what would count as. Obviously, this prayer would be disliked, but it's better than not praying it at all. So that's the idea there. Now, if one thinks he has finished a 4 rak'at prayer. Now he's giving you some scenarios, okay? And what happens in terms of when do you do sajda sahwa, when do you do this prostration of forgetfulness. So he's saying if one thinks that he has finished a 4 rak'at prayer, so you're praying a 4 rak'at prayer, you think you finished it, and you say the closing salam, hence you say the 2 salams at the end of it. You stand up, but you haven't turned away from the qibla yet. That's the main thing. You haven't turned away, or you haven't done any other breakout. You haven't talked to anybody or anything like that. You just stood up. That's all you've done. This standing up is mentioned, but it is not necessary. You could be sitting there, right? And then realizes he had actually been in the first sitting, having prayed only 2 rakats. Then you realize, oh, Lord, a minute, I've only prayed 2 rakats. Why did I do salam? So then he should complete that prayer. You just stand up and you carry on the prayer. You ignore the salam, basically. You carry on praying. Now, obviously, because you've done a salam where you're not meant to have done salam, likewise, you've probably prayed beyond the tashahud, you've prayed the durood, and so on, then you have to do a prostration of forgetfulness at the end. So he says, and then perform the prostration of forgetfulness, meaning at the end of that complete 4 rak'at now, you would now perform a prostration of forgetfulness. Now it does say if one thinks a 4 rak'at prayer, it could be the 3 rak'at prayer, a maghrib as well, same thing could happen there. If you prayed only 2 rak'ats and then you realized that I've only prayed 2, likewise a witr prayer, you've only prayed 2 rak'ats and you've still got 1 left and you realized after the salam, then you just get up and you carry on praying. You pray that 1 more rak'ah and at the end of it you do a sajda sahwa, okay? So this is no difference. Now, in that, whilst you're praying, if somebody else joins his prayer, then it's valid, because according to us, according to the Hanafis, according to majority anyway, if somebody comes and joins you in a prayer, they can join you. There's no problem. They can join you in that prayer. You didn't need to have an intention for leading them, you see. You just needed to have the intention of your prayer. So when they come and join you, it's fine. Likewise, when you are continuing your prayer in this way, then they can also join you. Now, remember this for later on. There's another ruling coming up which will make sense a lot more if you understand that properly. Moving on, if one begins to raise for the 3rd rak'ah, so you're now beginning to rise up for the 3rd rak'ah in a 3 or 4 rak'ah prayer, and then realizes he had not performed the first sitting. So you were in the sujood and you were getting straight up. You were getting up for the 3rd rak'at, but you hadn't performed the 2nd rak'at sitting, the first sitting, the qa'dah had not been performed yet. So you were still in transition. You were still getting up. You hadn't fully stood up yet into that third rakat, not fully stood up straight yet. You hadn't done that yet. You were just getting up. Then what should you do? He should return to the sitting position. Sit back down. So you've not got up fully, sit back down. Nothing happens. You don't have to do anything. Okay, just sit back down and pray the tashahhud and carry on. If, however, I'm going to interject a little bit here, okay, I'm going to mention the ruling in an easier way for myself anyway, and I think it'll be easier for everybody as well. So if, however, the person stood up fully stood up now into that third rakat, now you will not return into that sitting position of that second rakat. That first qa'dah, you will not return there. Why? Because you've now stood up into a qiyam, into a standing position, which is an integral. That's the fard. And the second rakat sitting, that first sitting, is not a fard, is not an integral. Okay, so if it's a wajib act, right? So if a person, you can't go, like I explained earlier, you can't go from a higher position to a lower position. You can't miss something which is of a higher status to go and perform something of a lower status. So now you have stood up fully. Now you've stood up fully, you've missed that, you're going to have to do sajda sahwa anyway. You've missed it, okay, because you've stood up into the third rakat. Even if a person did sit back down, it would be disliked for that person to sit back down, but even if they did, they would still have to do sajda sahwa anyway. So it makes no sense for this person who stood up fully into that third rakat now to sit back down, because they're going to have to do sajda sahwa anyway. They're going to have to do this prostration of forgetfulness at the end. So that's that mas'ala. Hopefully that's understood. So I'll move on from where it was in the book. So he says the same ruling applies to the final sitting. So now he's talking about the final sitting. So if a person was in that fourth rak'ah or the third rakat, and they were, or in the second rakat of Fajr, and they were in that sujood, the last sajda, and they got up fully, they were getting up fully. So the same applies there. He returns to it if omitted. You would return to that last sitting. The difference is, as long as he has not prostrated, we'll do later, but the difference is between this final sitting and the second rakat sitting is that the final sitting is an integral. So when you've stood up fully, you would still sit back down, because you have to sit, you have to do that final sitting. Okay, that final sitting is an integral. So if you stood up, if you're standing up, if you're not fully stood up, you're still transitioning and still not fully stood up, yeah, then you can sit back down and nothing will be due. There will be no sajda sahwa because you haven't done anything. You just done a little bit of extra little bit of extra movement. You haven't fully stood up yet. That's the idea. But if you fully stood up, then you will still sit back down into the qa'dah, into the sitting position, but you would now have to do a sajda sahwa because you stood up. So now we have to do a sajda sahwa. You have to do the prostration of forgetfulness. Now, if this says, as long as he has not prostrated. So what this means is, if you've stood up fully into that next rakat, if it's the fifth rakat, if it was a 4 rakat prayer, you stood up into the fifth rakat, or if it was a 3 rakat prayer, maghrib, or even witr, you've stood up into the 4th rakat, or if it was the fajr prayer, you've stood up into the 3rd rakat. And in that 3rd rakat, or 4th rakat, or the 5th rakat, the extra rakat, you've done the sajda now. You have now done the sajda. Then what happens? That if the final sitting, the qa'dah akhira, the final sitting was not done, that integral was not done, you stood up fully, then that 4 rakat of fard, or the 3 rakat, or the 2 rakat, whatever it is, that fard becomes invalid now. It's no longer valid. Okay, that all turns into a nafil now. So what we'll have to do is that 5th rakat that the person you've prayed, the 5th rakat, just add 1 more rakat, make it 6 rakats, and that will all turn into nafil, and you're going to have to repeat your fard. You can't make up for that by doing a sajda sahwa at the end, because you've missed an integral here. You've missed the qa'dah akhira, the last sitting, which is a integral. You've missed it because you've done the next rakat's sajda. So you can't make up for it now. So that's that saying, as long as he has not prostrated. If, however, he performed the prostration of the extra rakat. In the latter case, his obligatory fard prayer is invalidated and becomes a voluntary prayer, like I said. So that's what will happen. He then adds another rakat such that the extra 2 rakats constitute an additional voluntary prayer for him, and then him or her, and then performs the prostration of forgetfulness. So there, if you prayed 6 rakats now, you would perform a prostration of forgetfulness. Why? Because at the end of the 4th rakat, you didn't have a qa'dah, you didn't have a sitting, but because it's not an integral for a nafil prayer, it's fine. A nafil prayer would be fine, and all 6 rakats will be nafil. So that's what we will do when it comes to, meaning he didn't do a salam after the 4th rakat, or he didn't do qa'dah after the 4th rakat. So making up for that through a sajda sahw is fine in a nafil prayer, in a voluntary prayer. But the fard prayer will become invalidated. So you're going to have to start the fard prayer all over again. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So just to summarize now what we've done today. So we started off, if you remember, the ruling of the person who enters the masjid and hasn't prayed the sunnats of Fajr. So we said you pray as long as you will catch the salat. The other sunnats you do not pray if the jama'ah has already started. The sunnats of dhuhr can be made up, only those 4 sunnats, after the dhuhr prayer. And this is exceptional ruling for the 4 sunnats before dhuhr. No other sunnah will be made up like that. Even the fajr sunnahs, if the person has prayed the fajr, they will not make up for the fajr sunnahs after fajr. They will only make up the fajr sunnahs if they are doing if they missed the fard of fajr, and you are making up that fard of fajr before midday of that particular day. Then the sunnats will be prayed, and can be prayed, and then the 2 rakats of fard can be made up after that. Then we talked about some other rulings. The most important rulings I'll be going through now. The ruling of a person leaving the masjid once the congregation has started already, that you can't leave, is disliked, makruh, and makruh tahrimi. And there were a few rulings of detail there, which prayers it would be. And once the adhan has been called out, then again it is disliked to leave the masjid without praying the congregational prayer in that masjid, unless you have a valid reason. For instance, you're an imam somewhere else and you have to lead somewhere else, or something like that. There's an emergency come up. Then we talked about how when you come for the jama'ah and the imam is already in prostration, you have to catch the imam in prostration, in ruku', should I say, in the bowing position. You have to catch the imam in that ruku' for that rakat to count. That's that. Then we moved on to the rulings of sajdat as-sahw, the prostration of forgetfulness. General understanding is that the sajdat as-sahw can be done for making up a wajib, not for anything else. And it has to be something that's done mistakenly because of inattentiveness or something like that. The method of doing the sajda sahwi we talked about as well. So in the last sitting, whichever rakat it may be, in Fajr it be 2 rakats, in Maghrib it be the 3rd rakat, and in any 4 rakat prayer obviously it be the 4th rakat. So in that last sitting, a person after tashahhud, just tashahhud only, not durud, reading tashahhud, does 1 salam after the tashahhud, and then does 2 sajdas, and then starts again from the tashahhud in essence, and finishes the prayer off. So that's the method. And we went through the ruling of when a person begins to rise up for the third rakat, and we talked about the intricacies of that mas'ala as well. That as long as you're in between position, you haven't stood up fully, you can sit down and there'll be nothing due. If a person stood up fully, then they shouldn't sit back down unless it's the qa'idah akhira, the last qa'idah. Then a person, if he stood up fully, then you sit back down, as long as the sajda of that, the fifth rakat is not done, or the extra rakat is not done. Once the sajda is done, that prayer is invalid because of not doing the final sitting. So those were the rulings that we went through.